Well, unless you've been living under a rock, you should know that the surviving Beach Boys, along with Brian Wilson, have reunited for their 50th anniversary. They've got a 50th anniversary tour and a brand new studio album, That's Why God Made the Radio. And I've made no secret about this on the show. The Beach Boys are my favorite band. And hot on the heels of the announcement about this tour was a new book entitled 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, The Songs That Tell Their Story, by author Mark Dillon. What he's done is he's chosen 50 songs, or more accurately, he's spoken to 50 people, whether they be musicians or filmmakers, names you would know, like Cameron Crowe, Matthew Sweet, Zooey Deschanel. The Beach Boys themselves had them choose their favorite song and compiled the book, semi-chronologically, to tell the story of the band and also the personal experiences these celebrities and artists have had with their music. And we're happy to have Mark with us tonight. Mark, when did you become a Beach Boys fan?
I was about 7 years old, and it was my cousin who got me into the Beach Boys. She put a big pair of headphones on my small ears and punched in some tracks on an 8-track tape of the Beach Boys, Best of the Beach Boys Volume 2, and the songs that hooked me were Don't Worry Baby, California Girls, Help Me Rhonda, and I Get Around. So that was back when I was 7 years old.
You know, we have very similar stories because my mother had an 8-track of Endless Summer.
There you go. Endless Summer certainly brought a whole new generation of people to the Beach Boys music.
You know, for a classic band like the Beach Boys, there really haven't been that many books written about them when you consider books about the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin.
No, and the ones that have been written, most of them are really biographies of Brian Wilson and sort of tracking his personal problems. And I thought, you know, for me, it's really about the music, and I wanted to make that the focus of this book and, you know, bring to light some of the lesser-known work. I mean, I think it's a great body of work, and it deserves to be highlighted that way.
Of the other Beach Boys books that are out there, I'm sure you've read the David Leaf book, but do you have any favorites?
Well, I mean, a lot of these books, I mean, my book, in a way, also accumulates a lot of the knowledge we have of the Beach Boys that came from those books. And I think that's befitting of a 50th anniversary. It sort of collects, you know, a lot of the information that was out there, you know, before I ever got to it. And, you know, I want to pay tribute to all those writers, and I have some of them interviewed in the book as well. And they all serve a purpose. They have a lot of different angles to them. I mean, Peter Carlin's book was one that I found very useful. It has a lot of, you know, information about Brian that the other books don't have, and it also updated the story from where David Leaf, you know, left off 30 years ago. There's a book Keith Badman did called,
the Day-by-Day book.
Yeah, Beach Boys, definitive diary of the band in the studio and on stage. And I mean, that has a lot of information in it, as you say, day by day. Like, so that was very valuable in terms of concert dates and recording dates and stuff like that, and websites as well. A gentleman in the UK named Andrew G. Doe, who has also written a book about the Beach Boys. He has a website that collects, you know, every recording session date, you know, any bit of information that's out there, and he's done that with an historian named Ian Rustin. So that was a very valuable resource as well. John Stebbins has written some books that specifically tell the story of members. Like, he did one called The Real Beach Boy about Dennis Wilson, and he did one, and this is my favorite, The Lost Beach Boy about David Marks.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, and myself included, I mean, when that book came out, I'm like, you know, do I really need to read this book about David Marks? But then I did, and I mean, I think it's the best book detailing the early days of the band. I mean, David Marks was originally there in 1962 and 1963, although he knew the Wilson family prior to that, and he was jamming with Carl Wilson, you know, in the Wilson family home prior to that. But, I mean, so David Marks worked with John Stebbins on that book, and, I mean, the recall is fantastic. I mean, you know, they talk about, and then after this show, they went out and bought a steak. You know, I mean, it's that kind of detail, and it was really quite fascinating.
Well, you know, this 50th anniversary reunion tour, of course, I was happy to see Brian back with Mike and Alan Bruce, but I was most happiest about seeing that David was a part of it.
Well, he is often the forgotten one.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he was there really for their initial wave, if you pardon the pun, of success. I mean, their original hits and albums. I mean, he was there for that, and he has been totally forgotten. He came back for a couple of years in the 90s, I guess, and that reminded people. But I think he had gone to some lengths to disassociate himself from his time with the band. And in recent years, he realized, hey, I'm a part of this legacy too, and he's reclaiming it. So yeah, absolutely, it's fantastic to have him in the group there, and he's a great guitarist too. I saw the show in Toronto last Tuesday. I mean, if anyone is going to replace Carl Wilson and play those solos in the old car and surfing songs, he's the guy, because he was right there when they were recorded.
Yeah, and now when we get to hear him sing a bit too, because now they're doing Get You Back, they added that to the set list.
Yes, and I mean, he did not participate much in the singing aspect of it, back in the early 60s. Sure. He was going through puberty. He didn't really have a great voice for that. So, I mean, he was there for his rhythm guitar playing. But yes, he has become a quite capable vocalist. And, I heard them do Get You Back, and I thought he sounded great singing that.
Getting back to your book, what's unique about it is that you tell the story semi-chronologically of the Beach Boys, but you do it through interviews with various different artists and celebrities. We mentioned Zooey Deschanel, Sean O'Hagan from the High Llamas. Which came first? Did you come up with a list, or did these people just pick their favorites and then you compiled it that way?
It was a very complicated matrix. I guess I made a rough list of, which songs I thought needed to be covered in terms of their biggest hits, and also their most representative songs, like a little bit from every era. So I guess I started with a list of songs, and then often tried to find who would be the best person to speak to that. For example, if we're talking Help Me Rhonda, why not Al Jardine, who sings Help Me Rhonda?
Right.
But there were definitely occasions where, people obviously, I was aware of their affinity for the Beach Boys, or they worked with the Beach Boys, so, they agreed to an interview, and then, we may have, before the interview, tried to, narrow it down to a song or two they would speak about. And sometimes, even if we said we were going to talk about, and this happened with Al Cooper, I wanted him to talk about Surf's Up. And, as we were talking, I mean, it was pretty clear that he had this strong thing for the song Here Today off Pet Sounds, because he said he ripped it off in all kinds of songs that he did, as a solo artist and with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So, I thought, if this is where the good anecdotes are coming from, then I'll let him choose his song. I mean, at first it was sort of coming together like 50 different magazine articles, and somebody who had read it early on said, what you should do, like, to make this read like a book and not just a bunch of essays, is start each chapter telling us where the band was at the time the particular song in question was recorded, and then bring the interviewer in, or the interviewee, I should say. So that way, it has flow to it, at least I hope it does.
No, it definitely does. I read the whole thing over a span of 3 nights. What I thought we'd do is we talk about some of the songs in your book and also play them. So why don't you pick a song from the list of 50 that make up your book, and we'll spin one. Well,
how about Girl Don't Tell Me?
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people love that song. Might not be the best known, but it's certainly got a lot of fans.
Well, it's a great song from the Summer Days and Summer Nights album, also on the Endless Summer compilation, which is a little strange because it was never a hit single, but it's one of those songs you can relate to, because I think growing up, every guy has that summer vacation they went on, and they met some girl, and they pledged their undying love, and then after it was over, you never heard from her ever again. So
it's an honest teenage experience.
Yeah, here's Girl Don't Tell Me.
Hi, little girl, it's me, don't you know who I am?
From 1965, Summer Days and Summer Nights album, The Beach Boys with Girl Don't Tell Me. And it's also one of the 50 songs discussed in the new book by Mark Dillon, our guest, entitled 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, the Songs That Tell Their Story. And to give a little shout-out to the Smiley Smile message board, there was a thread about that song recently. Mark, of all the 50 songs mentioned in the book, were there some favorites of yours that, for whatever reason, you couldn't include?
There's a bunch. I mean, there's some of their bigger hits are not even represented, like Be True to Your School,
right?
When I Grow Up to Be a Man, Dance, Dance, Dance. So it's kind of sad that I wasn't able to get those in. And I have a lot of personal favorites as well. I mean, stuff that is not as well known. I mean, I love a track called Aren't You Glad?
Sure.
I love a lot of Dennis Wilson stuff, and I have a few of them in there, but he did a B-side called Celebrate the News, which I think is fantastic.
Yep.
You know, and 50 at first seemed like a lot of songs to talk about, but in the end it seemed like it was only scratching the surface.
I think this might be the only book that's coming out tying into the 50th anniversary.
Shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm really shocked. I thought there'd be a plethora of books out there, but I guess you've got the playing field to yourself for now. And again, it's a great book, 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, the songs that tell their story. And there are some great people in here. We mentioned Roger McGuinn. Also, Mike Kowalski talking about Do It Again. And see, that's the fun of the book, because you've got these people talking about specific songs. But, if Kowalski's talking about Do It Again, which obviously he didn't play on, but he played it live, and then he'll talk about something that happened in the 80s,
Well, I love digressions,
Yeah.
and I thought if there's definitely, a main subject to each chapter, and that's, one person talking about one song. But, if Roger McGuinn has a story about Brian Wilson showing up at his house in the 70s and looking for some speed,
Right.
who am I not to print that?
Exactly. Another one.
How about Feel Flows?
Well, you're preaching to the choir here. Another one of my favorites. And in your book, you talk to Cameron Crowe about how he used this song at the end of Almost Famous. And I know that Jack Riley, who was the Beach Boys manager during that time period, the early 70s, is not a popular guy among Beach Boys fans, but, his cosmic lyrics seem to work on the Surf's Up album.
He got the best work out of Carl, because I think those are Carl's best compositions, the ones that he did with Jack Riley.
Unfolding, enveloping missiles of soul.
From 1971 Surf's Up album featuring the always incredible voice of Carl Wilson, that was Feel Flows. And you know what? I'm going to pick one from your book.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was very happy to see that a track from the Beach Boys' Love You album was represented in the book.
Why did I have a feeling you were going to pick that?
The song is Johnny Carson. And you talked to Peter Ames Carlin, who wrote the Catch a Wave book on Brian Wilson, about this.
Right.
It's such a strange album, The Beach Boys' Love You. It really is. It's almost like a precursor to New Wave. And the song Johnny Carson is just so downright weird with its lurching melody. And you've got a great story in the book about when Johnny actually heard the song.
Yes, Timothy White, who I should mention also wrote one of the best songs of the band, The Nearest Faraway Place, former Billboard editor, interviewed Johnny Carson for a profile in Rolling Stone, and of course, as a Beach Boys fan, had to ask Carson if he had heard this song, to which Carson replied that yes, he had. He said, yeah, I guess it was just something they threw together to have fun, because it's not a work of art. But hey, a lot of people think otherwise.
Yeah, no, I think it is. Listen, they put Johnny Carson up on a pedestal in this song.
Yeah, and Patti Smith was so moved by this album, she wrote a poem in Melody Maker magazine, I think it was, expressing her love for it.
He sits behind his microphone. Who's the man that we admire?
Yes, Johnny Carson from the Beach Boys' Love You album, one of the songs discussed in the new book, 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, the songs that tell their story, by our guest tonight, Mark Dillon. And Mark, one of the things you couldn't mention in the book, because the book came out before the album was released, what are your thoughts on the new Beach Boys record, That's Why God Made the Radio?
I like it. I mean, it's better, I think, than any new album the Beach Boys have put their name to going back 35 years. I mean, admittedly, that's slim pickings, because they have not put out a lot of albums in that time, and some of the ones they put out are pretty spotty at best. But I think the difference here is that this is the first Beach Boys album where Brian is the dominant creative force in all those years, and that's why it's so good. I mean, he has gone on to be quite successful as a solo artist, and I think he delivers the goods. I mean, if you like the upbeat, fun in the sun stuff, I mean, if you can believe a bunch of 70-year-olds, singing about spring vacation,
Right.
then if you're up for that, I think they do a pretty convincing job of it. But even more so, I mean, the album ends with 3 or 4 slower, more reflective Brian Wilson songs, and that's part of the Beach Boys' legacy as well. So, I mean, I think it captures all those different styles that make the Beach Boys great. I mean, at times, the production, veers a little bit towards...
it's like MOR. And
Yeah, and that's, I think, part and parcel of working with Joe Thomas, who Brian Wilson worked with for his 1998 solo album Imagination. But overall, I think it's a solid album, and debuted at number 3 on Billboard, which is phenomenal.
Oh yeah, no, you can't argue with that. I mean, that was one of my concerns, and that's not a knock on Joe Thomas. I mean, he's got his own production sound, and listen, he's been very successful. For me, it's all about melody. I mean, if you don't have a great melody, you've got nothing.
Right.
And Brian Wilson has melodies to spare.
Well, like they say, I mean, with Brian Wilson, it was always the music is the message, I mean, they did a lot of different lyrical styles. He had a lot of different collaborators, but it always comes back to those Brian Wilson melodies and those Brian Wilson productions.
Let me ask you one last question here with regards to the 50th anniversary of the Beach Boys. And again, the book is 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, the songs that tell their story. There's been a lot of speculation. In a way, I feel it's a little too early. I mean, my God, they just put out the record and just went on the tour, but there's a lot of speculation about what's next with these guys. And if anything, we know the Beach Boys, they're unpredictable. What do you think is going to happen next?
I interviewed them recently for a Toronto Star article, and Bruce Johnston was pretty firm that after September, when these 50th anniversary dates are done, he's going back to do his thing with Mike. And I think some tour dates that have been announced confirm that, because I think they're headed, Mike and Bruce, down to South America. So, I mean, it's not surprising that they would continue on. They've been touring together, under the banner of the Beach Boys for many years now. Brian Wilson has been successfully touring as a solo artist. I think those, who want this to go on the most are Al Jardine and David Marks. I mean, this is, the best gig they've had in a long time. They're having a lot of fun with it, and fans are too. I mean, it would be a shame if it did come to an end, but that's not to say the whole thing is over, because I think Brian probably still has some music left in him.
Mark Dillon's book is called 50 Sides of the Beach Boys, the songs that tell their stories, from ECW Press, and you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. Where can people find you, Mark?
I am on Twitter, at Mark G. Dillon, and I'm on Facebook as well. And the book is also on iTunes.
Very cool, Mark. Thanks a lot.
It's been fun, Ghosty.
All righty, bye-bye.
Take care.